Hey guys, my name is Frank Renteria, and today we'll be looking at Grieg's Peer Gynt Suite number 1, and we will actually only be focusing on the fourth movement, known as In the Hall of the Mountain King. This presentation consists of three main parts, the first part being a formal overview of the piece, then a detailed analysis, and finally just my personal thoughts on the piece. So for now, we'll just listen to the piece and go from there. For the first part of the presentation, we'll be looking at the formal overview. Essentially, this is just a structure overview of the piece as a whole. This piece really didn't have a specific structure to follow or any of the traditional structures that we are familiar with. However, I decided to split it up into four main sections. You have the A section, the A prime section, the B section, and the C section. Notice that these sections consist of subphrases. So it's just phrases that are smaller than the overall larger phrase. So notice that in the A section, the A prime section, and the C section, there's three subphrases. Notice that in the B section, there's only two subphrases. For the most part, these subphrases are 8 measures long, and they are either composed of two compound basic ideas or a basic idea and a consequent to follow. I used the cadences as sort of my anchor to divide the work into 4 sections, and we will discuss a little bit more in depth in the following slides. Okay, so for the second part, we will be having a detailed analysis, which is essentially just a much more detailed analysis of the subphrases that exist within the larger sections. So we will be discussing ostinato's motifs and the themes that are introduced and their basic structure. Okay, for the first motif, we will be looking at the bass line and its development through the work. So essentially, it's introduced by the bassoons, and it's just a perfect fifth. It's 1 and 5, or tonic and dominant, back and forth. And we can see that whenever the bass voices have the melody, the bassoons are playing this motif. And when the bassoons start the melody, then you can see that the basses start playing the motif that the bassoons were playing previously. So this bass line is very repetitive. The first one is B to F sharp, then D to A, and it just goes back and forth, back and forth. And so then there's no harmonic structure or support aside from just the melody itself. So the very first time when we see the bass line descend and change contour, to me it signals a new section and or sounds a bit more cadential. So this is how the bass line develops through the piece. It went from a fifth to really fast eighth notes. Okay, so remember that we talked about the four main sections and how each of those four main sections have subphrases within. So now we'll be discussing the subphrases that exist within the larger sections. There's only really four different subphrases, and these two are the ones that repeat the most. So we'll go over the first subphrase and the second one. So you can see that the first one consists of 8 measures, and it has 2 compound basic ideas. And the second one is a hybrid 4 because it has a compound basic idea and a consequent with a cadential sound to it. Okay, we're going to look at the very first one from the previous slide. It's just a compound basic idea, and it consists of 8 bars. And I want you to listen to it. I'm not showing you the music because I just want you to listen to it first to see what you think. Okay? So, this is what I just played on the piano, and you can see that the last 2 bars, which would be your contrasting ideas, don't really cadence, which is why I just called it a compound basic idea. You can also see that there's lack of harmonic support, tonality for cadence, and thus me categorizing it as just a compound basic idea. The second theme is essentially the same thing, but it's just transposed to the dominant key. One of the differences is the contour of the line. So the very first one, like you heard in the previous slide, was descending chromatically, and this one ascends to a very peculiar interval, which is a flat 6. That interval right there. And you can also notice that unlike the very first compound basic idea from the very beginning, it has scale degree 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in a minor key, while this one in the dominant key has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the major key. Now we're going to be looking at the hybrid number 4, or the compound basic idea plus a consequent. This one is different in the sense that it actually sounds like it cadences, and I just want you to listen again, like in our previous example. Okay, so here's the main theme again, first presented by the bassoons, and it's the same 2-measure basic idea. However, the contrasting idea, it's different. It doesn't go to 3. So this whole time we've been tonicizing 3. We've had 1 and then 3. And this one actually just stays in 1. Every time that this contrasting idea shows up in the score, the harmony underneath supports a cadential conclusion. The cadence that occurs in the following measures resemble a cadence or a perfect authentic cadence in the minor tonic key. However, it often expresses the beginning of the new section. In a way, it's elided because it's also the beginning of the new section. And unlike the first subphrase that ends on 3, this one ends on 1. And there's an accent on 1 that can help us support this conclusion. Okay, so now's the moment that everybody's been waiting for, the score. So here we have the motivic material, which we already discussed, and the first compound basic idea, followed by the next compound basic idea being our first subphrase. Then you have compound basic idea, another compound basic idea that is the second subphrase of the first section, and then you have the compound basic idea of the third subphrase and its consequent. So you can see that the consequent, like we discussed in the previous slide, is different in the sense that the contrasting idea actually just tonicizes 1 instead of going back to 3, which is what we've been hearing this whole time. So we've been hearing 3, and it repeats itself quite literally again. Then this third sub-phrase it just tonicizes 1. And you can also see that you have the change in contour from the bass line. It's the very first time that the bass line is not playing open fifths and or highlighting the harmony of either the tonic, the third, or the fifth of whatever the harmony is. And you can see that this A prime section, I know it says A, but that's only the rehearsal number. This is actually the beginning of the A prime section. It's sort of elided because it's the beginning of the A prime section, but it's also the end of the A section. And the reason why I sort of went with this idea is because you can see that the bass is just descending. And so it doesn't go to do or tonic or 1 until the beginning of the following section. Here you can see the same sort of harmonic structure. You have 1, then 3, then 1, major 2, flat 2, 1, 3. And the reason for this is because there's really nothing to support that, which is why I'm sort of just trying to build chords off of what's there. Here you see that it goes to 5, then you have the flat 6 scale degree, then 5, flat 6, 5, and it stays on 5, flat 6, 5, flat 6, 5, then back to 1, 2, flat 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, flat 2, and then we have the contrasting idea of the hybrid 4. Here is the contrasting idea, and it helps with the cadential feel. So, like I said, we've been expecting 3, and all of a sudden it just tonicizes 1 again, and you see the bass line descending, and then you have the actual B section, which just happens to match up with the B rehearsal number. So I just wanted you to notice something, that now the horns and the brass is more prominent. So in the past we've had this sort of like upbeats of just color and little harmony support, as opposed to here. I've boxed the brass section and you can see that it's 1 for the most part. Okay, so in the previous slides, I'm sure you noticed that I had a bunch of Roman numerals right underneath about beat 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so it was just a lot. And now I we get into this part where we see the brass joining in and providing harmonic support. So now you have 1, then 3, then 1. So for this third section where you see the 1, in the previous slides I had 1, then major 2, flat 2, then 1 again. And here I just left 1 only because it's a prolongation that the brass aids with. Okay, so here's the same thing. You have a 3, then at the bottom, this is what I was talking about, how when it was thinner, when the orchestration was thinner, I had 5, flat 6, 5, flat 6, 5. And now I'm really only considering to call this 5 because it's sort of, the brass is playing a 5 chord there, and there isn't really a lot of shift back and forth because they're sustaining this chord and they have accents on it as well. Okay, so this is the consequent of the second subphrase in the B section. This is a very important time in the piece because it's actually the very first time that 5 is tonicized with the 6th chord. So remember, this whole time we've been hearing that the flat 6 interval, right? So this is actually the very first time where you have a minor 6th, which is a step higher. So it's the very first time where it actually sounds tonicized and it provides harmonic support. So it also gives it a major sonority. And remember that the reason why it's been so hard to find these cadences, it's because we don't have that feel of a 5 before the beginning of the new section. So that here you can also see that on the last beat, there's actually a 5 chord. It has all 3 of the notes that is needed for the 5 chord. You have F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. Of course, you have the woodwinds going crazy and just having a bunch of ornamentation at the top. And it's the very first time before an actual section that you can hear sort of a cadence. If you go back to the recording, just try to find that major sounding part right before the end of the piece. So now we're moving into a new section, the C section. And you can see that harmony is now again being prolonged. You have 1 and then 3, 1, and then back to 1. So this is different because we've been used to 2 major things. The first one is a descending bass line that signals the beginning of a new section, and the consequent, which tonicizes 1, and or that minor 6 interval in the 5 when it modulates to the dominant. Here, it's followed by a fully diminished common tone chord. And I know that sounds crazy, but it really does. So at the beginning of this new section, which I've decided to call the C section, you don't have that bass line, you don't have any 5, it just goes to 1 and a common tone chord. Okay, so now we move towards the end of the C section, and this is the very first time, and I'm talking about the second yellow big box, the second time that we actually have some sort of strong cadential melody and harmony that support each other. So this is what the melody sounds like. And in the bass, you have scale degree 6, 5, 5, down an octave, and then 1. And above that, you have supporting harmony of 6, the 1 chord at the top with scale the 5th at the bottom, which is your 5, 6, 4. Then it moves to 5, and then back to 1. Now, the only weird thing about this section, and sort of what makes it sound like we still haven't reached that point, is that what precedes the downbeat of the B is a common tone fully diminished chord. So after that beautiful minor chord progression, then you have, and it doesn't really allow you to feel the cadence. It also repeats twice, which is why I feel that maybe the first cadence that occurs is sort of a one more time technique, and or it can be not really a cadence. The second time, which is the big yellow box, the second one, it feels a little bit better because your ear was able to process, I guess, the first one, and so then the second one sounds a little bit more natural. So here is that third subphrase diagram that is part of the C section. And you can see how it's cadential material. And it's one more time because it's sort of a perfect authentic cadence, but it follows a fully diminished common tone chord. And then when it's repeated again, it also follows that same common tone fully diminished chord, but your ear processes it a bit more naturally. So after this one more time technique that we've been talking about and how I believe that that perfect authentic cadence is actually sort of the end of the piece, then you have this tail like coda or material after the cadence, which to me just sounds, more dramatic and different from the music because we haven't really had any of this in the previous sections. So that's why I've sort of labeled this as a coda on its own. And this is what it looks like. So now we've reached the end of the presentation, and one of the things that struck the most out to me was pretty much just the whole harmonic structure of the piece. It was very empty and complete in the sense of, oh, what do I make out of these chords? And so that was part of the challenge. Also, I really liked the fact that even though I labeled some of these points in music as cadences, I really only labeled one as a perfect authentic cadence. Yes, there was two, but I feel that the very first one was a one more time technique because by this time the piece has been speeding up so much, and it's been crescendoing, and so then your ear can process it, and so by the second time that you hear it or somebody points it out to you, then you say, oh, okay, it sounds more like a cadence. And I just think that it's brilliant of him to compose it in this way because that's how he sort of gets away with repeating this compound basic idea over and over and over again. And so the fact that he has this repetitive subphrase coexisting within the whole work, and then he adds a hybrid four, or what I've sort of labeled as a hybrid four, is pretty genius. I would like to leave you with this quote, which is kind of funny in my opinion. He says, he said, I am sure my music has a taste of codfish in it. And so I just think that this was very iconic of him, and in the sense that, some of his music was so harmonically different than what people were composing at the time. And I just think he is truly, a great composer.